Welcome back. I hope all of you enjoy your delicious vegetarian lunch. Thank you again to all our volunteers. And what better than to continue the afternoon talking about food? Dr. Cristina Tirado is a clinical assistant professor of environmental science at Loyola Marymount University. She works at the interface between science and policy related to climate change, health, food and sustainable development with the university, World Health Organization, governments, and NGOs worldwide. She has served as the World Health Organization Food Regional Advisor in Europe and in Latin America, and she is currently a policy advisor for several UN organizations. To speak with us this afternoon on ethical eating, please welcome Dr. Cristina Tirado.
Oh, now it's working. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the invitation and, thank you for the food. It was impressively wonderful and good and healthy, and this is what I am going to talk about, so very timely. So the first time that I met with Tutsi Foundation was in the framework of the work of climate change. So your foundation is so high and relevant in the climate change arena that everybody can notice. So I work on climate change and diets and healthy diets. And when I met you, I thought this is impressive because we don't need to talk. It's like talking to the converted, but from a different way, a different point of view, because it's ethical. And it's completely changing the conversation. This is something that, in the climate change negotiations, they never thought about that. So, this way. Okay, let me change this. I don't think that is working.
I think you have to.
Is that one?
Yeah.
Oh, can I move it with this?
Okay, it's on.
Oh, can I move it with this? I can move it with this. Okay, very good, thank you so much. So in the negotiations, I have been in part of the negotiations since we thought that the Paris Climate Treaty was going to be signed in 2009. That was the Copenhagen. It was going to be called the Copenhagen Treaty. That was in 2010, and it did not happen. So all the way up to the Paris Treaty, we have been working in trying to bring co-benefits and working with the health sector and the ministries of health, trying to bring all the conversation that doctors, nurses, and the health sector are talking anyway about, but to bring good mitigation strategies. So, for example, one of them, we have been talking about clean energy, about renewables, and moving out from coal, for all the reasons related to air pollution and respiratory diseases. So in that sense, we have been advocating a lot with ministries of health and ministries of environment during prior signing the Paris Treaty. Another issue that we have been working a lot was in active transport. We were working, it's the typical logical things that a doctor will tell you. You should make more exercise, you should walk more. So we have been working with ministries of environment and sectors, the transport sector, in trying to promote a combination of safe, active transport, walking and biking, together with public transport. And the third one that has been very well accepted, because it's logical again, is to shift into more plant protein-based diets. And this is, again, logical things that medical sector will recommend in a practice. So we are not asking for anything strange. That was, when the Paris Treaty was signed, it was very interesting that the commitment was to keep the temperature of the planet below 2 degrees centigrade, and in all as possible to keep it at 1.5. 1.5 is not possible anymore. There are many places in the planet that they have already reached 2. And beyond 2 degrees centigrade, the islands may start to, to be flooded. We are seeing that there is more melting and more rapidly melting of the Arctic and the Antarctic areas, and the sea level rise will go. So, this was interesting. Today we made history, but thank God they did make history, because it was already too late. It says we have now only 11 years since today, 11 years until 2030 to reduce the emissions in the planet by 50% of what we had before. And this is why, I don't know if you have heard that children all over the world have been striking on Fridays, because their future is compromised. And this is what they are in the street, because their future is compromised. So, and the future of the planet, of course. So, looking into the diets, diets are extremely important. I will show you more data after, because depending on the diets, the emissions, the greenhouse emissions, and the potential, at the same time, the potential for mitigation of greenhouse emissions is huge. A vegetarian diet or a vegan diet will not produce so many emissions as just a flexitarian diet or omnivorous diet. So I am going to frame a little bit my talk in the same way that is done recently in the climate change arena, and is using very simple questions that the natives from the islands in Fiji work with. And this has been a way of bringing different conversations into the UNF Framework Convention of Climate Change. And they have proposed to use the Talanoa dialogue. So we are just asking for very simple questions like, where are we, where we want to go, and how do we get there, right? And this was the way of bringing the diets into the conversation. So where are we? The situation that we have independently of climate change is that we have a problem of nutrition in every single country in the world. In some countries, we still have child stunting. We have 2 billion of people that are undernourished, and we have a big problem on undernutrition. But if you see the same map, on the other hand, there is a problem of obesity in absolutely all the countries. So obesity and overweight is a problem everywhere, and we are calling this the double burden of malnutrition. And we can address this double burden of malnutrition through healthy diets that promote more fruits and vegetables and more plant protein base. So this is a summary of the main impacts that have been found in the, on health by the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. I am a lead author of the health chapter of the IPCC. IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. And this has been a summary of the impacts that you can find. And we found that undernutrition and consequent children development disorders was the main impact. That there was an impact beyond what you have seen of the impacts on undernutrition and lack of vitamins and malnutrition. And this was concluded that was going to be the main impact on health of climate change worldwide at the global level. On the other hand, with medium confidence, we have seen that diarrheal diseases will be another impact. So putting both together, this may have a huge impact in areas where you or me, usually volunteer, think about any time where we go after a disaster. This is what we find. Children that are undernourished, and after 2 weeks of a disaster, the first thing that we see is a peak of diarrheal diseases. They start 2 weeks, like in most of after disaster recovery exercise. In other countries, like for example in LA, we will see other kind of issues. We are seeing already cardiorespiratory diseases due to the air poor quality, which if we were switching into renewables, and in other areas in the US they were moving out from coal, the air quality will be better. Or, if we were moving into active transport and a combination of walking, biking with public transport, and the LA plan has a very good plan for this, the air pollution will be much improved. So looking into food, if you look at this map, the areas in green and like this pistachio green are areas where a combination, okay, sorry, let me back up. When you think climate change, you have to think about two parameters, okay? One of them is the increase of CO2, increase of emissions of CO2, greenhouse emissions, and the second is increase of temperature. So, if we increase temperature and we increase CO2, plants will grow better, right? That will increase photosynthesis. So, this is what may happen in the areas that you can see in green and in pistachio green, up to an increase of temperature of 1.8 degrees centigrade. Beyond that, if the temperature goes beyond 2 degrees centigrade, the production will not grow there. And in the areas that you can see here that are already affected by droughts, the rain-fed literature will be gone. And more than 3 degrees centigrade, the agriculture may collapse. I mean, we may think about other ways of doing agriculture in agroponics or other systems, but we have to think about systems change now. There's no much time for this. So the areas, if you see, the areas that were already affected by undernutrition, you see the circle, those areas, we have seen that the production may decrease up to 50%. There is a 25%, but there is more. Now we have new data that could decrease up to 50% in that specific area, which are the subtropical regions, okay? So at the same time, and this is important for food aid and it's important for nutrition, we are seeing, and remember what I mentioned, that in climate change what is happening is that the CO2 levels are going up, okay? We have seen in several studies, and there are few, this is new, in several studies that the more CO2 levels in the atmosphere, we are finding that there is a decrease of important micronutrients and protein in foods that are very important, like staples, in many diets, for example, if we are vegetarian, right? Look, the first graph on the top, you can see a mix of flowers, winter, they are spring and winter flowers, and how the percent of protein is going down according to the increase of CO2 that is predicted by the year 2100. When we talk about climate change, we don't think about next week. We just think always, what is going to happen about the future generations, what is going to happen to your kids, the kids of your kids and future generations, because we are okay, but we are the first generation that realize about climate change, and my students are the last generation that can do something about climate change. So this is again why the kids were in the street. But if you see, this is the estimations are 2100. You can think that this is far away, but this is very short term for the next generations, right? So see the graph below. It shows you that doubling CO2 concentration from pre-industrial levels, which basically is what we have. They have been looking at the average effect on 125 different cultivars, and they have seen decreases in macronutrients and minerals, and I was mentioning lower protein in important foods like rice, of barley, of staples, and potatoes, and soybean was not so much impacted. Now there are new studies that I have not shown there looking into impacts in citrus, in vitamins. So, you know, we will have like to reassess the protein and minerals and nutrient contents of our foods, but also in societies where they only eat one plate or one staple per day because they don't have anything else. Look at the different, and they will need some complements because they will not have enough nutrients. So this is something else that we have to consider. Some of the studies that have been looking into the impacts of climate change, at the beginning, it was very difficult to calculate anything else but the impacts in kilocalorie availability. Why? Because they were working with big staples. Like they were looking in commodities that were giving calories. And suddenly one of our colleagues that Tutsi knows very well, he has been doing predictive models and looking into the impacts, and this was surprising, most of the impacts of climate change will be in fruits and vegetables. So that's a big problem. Because this is what the World Health Organization is recommending to you to eat mostly, like 4 grams or 5 grams per day, and people cannot do it or afford it. If the fruits and vegetables are impacted, in many places the price goes up and the consumption of the consumer just goes down. Some consumers, they don't, you know, even if it is good for you, if the price is very high, will not get it. And red meat will be also impacted. And it's interesting that this impact of daily and for per capita per day will be very visible in high-income countries and in the West Pacific region. So high-income countries have to realize that this is happening, again, because we are, you know, our food system and our energy system and transport systems are not sustainable. This, to put things under context, and most of you are in the health sector, when the World Health Organization did a burden of disease and an assessment of the impacts of climate change in different aspects, like they were looking into heat, child malnutrition, diarrheal diseases, malaria, and dengue, they got these little impacts, and because it's very difficult to know, for example, in a hospital, you go to a hospital and nobody dies with a certificate of death that says climate change killed me, okay? Many times when you have a heat stress, what you find is maybe cardiovascular problems or heart failure, or, you know, only if they have heat stress very clearly will include this in a death certificate. But if you have a failure, a renal failure, this will not show. And those are all the symptoms that we are seeing in hospitals of the impacts of climate change and heat waves. I am just talking about heat waves. So in the studies that were done with food, in order to put things under context, Marco was showing all these scenarios and the impacts in the amount of fruits and vegetables in our diets and the weight-related diseases that may happen because of the, remember the previous graph in what I was showing, the negative impact on fruits and vegetables. Putting things in context, it will be the mortality and the burden of disease of this impact in the diet, in the quality of diet, much worse than the impacts that we have seen in child undernutrition, which were looking only at kilocalories, okay? So this is something that we wanted to put it under context. This is because there's new information. So what is the world? What are countries and nations doing about this? Very little. At least we have seen the national adaptation programs of action have been developed and funded for least developed countries, okay? So here you can see the percentage of countries that have been addressing certain problems, and we are happy that 98% were addressing health, food security, all of them, agriculture, all of them. However, nutrition is always an orphan, always. Only 29% of the least developed countries that have developed these national adaptation programs, and they were funded for that, have identified nutrition as a priority. And only 64, which is a good number but is not enough, have identified gender. Why gender is important? Because many gender responsive interventions can help in the family to have good choices for healthy food, okay? So look, those are the 29%. Those are the countries that have identified nutrition as a priority. And if you remember the graph that I showed you before with countries that were affected by malnutrition, this is totally in line and in that circle, but they are missing many countries. Many of them that, you know, that in sub-Saharan Africa, or, you know, Yemen is not there. I mean, all sub-Saharan Africa should be included. At the same time, look at this. This is the amount, the proportion of funding for adaptation projects related to health that we have so far. So this is insignificant in relation to all the other funding. Only 1.5% of funding has been placed for health adaptation. All the others are in other sectors. So imagine if they have this for health, how much they put for nutrition. It's always, as I was mentioning, is an orphan. So now I want to show you the opportunities for the food system for greenhouse mitigation. The food system, the data that we have right now is that accounts for up to 30% of the total greenhouse emissions. This is more than the transport system, and this is just below the energy system. So they are badly positioned. They are badly positioned, and at the same time they have a huge opportunity for improving and reducing emissions. So the last figures that I have been reading in papers that have not been published yet is that this 30% is more a 40%, because every time the societies and rapidly increase economies in China and in Brazil and in India and in Russia, they are eating more meat. And the population growth is growing very rapidly. So there is a huge opportunity for mitigation, because if we don't stop, the greenhouse emissions could, from the food systems could be rise up to 80% to the increase of consumption of animal products and meat. The more affluent our societies in China, in Russia, in India, and in Brazil, rapid emerging economies again, the more meat are eating. And all the food-related, if we don't stop this, the food-related greenhouse emissions could account for 0.5% of all emissions in 2050, and the temperature will definitely not be kept at that level, at 2 degrees centigrade, and could exceed the levels by 2070. So this is, we have a huge opportunity in promoting more plant-based protein diets. But when we were looking again at policies, and this is an analysis of all the policies that the countries, 165 countries, have submitted to the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change to, as a commitment of the Climate Paris Treaty, we have seen that many of them are looking into agriculture, they are looking into health, food waste, which is good, feed, animal feed, very little nutrition, but zero diet. So what we are doing right now is a gap analysis. We are trying to see what all these policies are missing totally. And they are missing many things. We don't find any active, or I don't have the data here, we have not published them, but we are going to be publishing them in the WHO bulletin. But there are only few countries have addressed biking or walking as a way to mitigate climate change, and 0 countries have realized or thought about voluntary family planning as a way to adapt. I am not talking about mitigating climate change. I am talking about adapting to the huge impacts that climate change has in populations where I work in sub-Saharan Africa, where they don't have access and they don't even relate reproductive health with having children. They don't have that knowledge. So the countries where nutrition was included in the intended national determined contributions, again, you can see them, but most of the countries that are affected by hunger that I showed you in the first graph are not included there. So this is a big gap, and we are trying to identify gaps in what countries are bringing to the UN Framework Convention of Climate Change, because policies have to be coherent. So where do we want to go? As I mentioned before, where we want to go is to keep or to limit the temperature below 2 degrees centigrade, or if it is possible, to limit the increase of temperature at 1.5. And it was good that in the Paris Treaty, when the text was defined, the health sector has been working for many years with the UNFCCC in order to include a sentence, because there you have to have like your sentence. Okay, let me see. I don't know what this is asking. Sorry. Can you give me a hand with this? But I don't see well. What I see there, I don't see what is asking. Sorry. Recession. Yes, okay. Okay. I hope that is coming back. Yeah, thank you. So the health sector was working with the UNFCCC for many years to include this specific sentence in the negotiating text that was saying that they recognize social, economic, and environmental value of mitigation actions and their co-benefits for adaptation, health, and it took us many years to have that word, but it's in the negotiating text, and sustainable development. So this is important. Now I use this one now? Yes? Okay, I don't have the talk anymore here. I was moving it from here. Yes, thank you. Do you think that you can fix it? Yes. Okay. So, sorry about that. So the importance of including health in the negotiating text was because every time that one country is submitting any of the national determined contributions, they have to assure, or they will be questioning, if their interventions that they are sending, they address health properly, okay? Sorry about that. I think that we are there back. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. It's still not moving, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you so much. So this is what we have been using from the IPCC. From the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, in the last report, they were highlighting very clearly that we have to look at the opportunities to achieve co-benefits from actions that reduce emissions and at the same time improve health. Like in this case, oh sorry, but this is doing the same thing again. At the same time is, sorry, it's just moving by itself. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just moving by itself. And at the same time, the IPCC was recommending that in countries that were high intakes of meat, there were a lot of co-benefits of reducing meat intake. And they say the same thing about energy, and what I was mentioning, the same thing about the co-benefits of getting the births more spaced in young girls and young women, particularly in countries, thank you, in countries where this is a challenge because they don't have access to voluntary family planning. Now, if you see some of the studies that I thought that they were like more relevant, they were giving us the reductions of emissions that we may have having diets that are more healthy. So, for example, a Mediterranean diet will provide a reduction of greenhouse emissions of 30%, a pescatarian 45%, but a vegetarian will be 55% of the emissions that a regular income-dependent diet will have otherwise. The income-dependent diet is the typical flexitarian diet that you are seeing that is being adopted by any populations and groups and countries. As more funding and more money and more income they have, more meat they are eating. So we can get, being vegetarian, a 50% of the reductions in greenhouse emissions. But now, look at this graph. This graph was what is convincing, you know, to all the people that could not understand the previous graph, is that the same diets, if you see, the vegetarian diet is the most important to decrease the relative risk of health conditions like in relation to conventional omnivorous income-dependent diets, in relation to the, you know, to the vegetarian, to the pescatarian and Mediterranean. The vegetarian is the one that will decrease more the risk of type 2 diabetes. Or we have seen that in terms of cancer, the pescatarian is the best, or coronary mortality, Mediterranean is the best. And in all causes, the mortality, Mediterranean is the best, but we don't have data for the vegetarian. But look in type 2 diabetes, it makes a huge difference in the risk reduction. So when we are talking about using food as a medicine, in the case of type 2 diabetes, I have started to see papers from the University of San Francisco in which they are talking about giving as a prescription, you know, fruits and vegetables, because this is the benefits that we may have. So this is what I was telling you, a combination of a healthy diet and active transport. You know, it will be like, it will bring a lot of emissions down, and at the same time, it will have a lot of co-benefits for health. And you know, in other countries, I don't know, I am from Spain. In Spain, I grew up with a bike. And you know, we bike all the time, and now there are more and more bike lanes, and they're very safe. But here, the first time that I took a bike, I was hit by a car, so, you know, but now the LA plan, for example, is trying to combine bike lines, safe bike lines, with public transport, and it will take a while. But in places where this is possible, it's an excellent combination, you know, to promote physical activity. And how we get there. So I wrote a paper that, if you want, I can send it to you, or you can find it online, the Sustainable Diets for Healthy People and a Healthy Planet, with the UN Standing Committee of Nutrition. And one of the main recommendations that we have was that a transition to plant-based diets were leading to lower greenhouse emissions, and at the same time, they were reducing diet-related non-communicable diseases. So the paper and the UN Standing Committee on Nutrition, which is a group working with WHO, FAO, WFP, UNEP, UNICEF, and Biodiversitas International, they were concluding that the food-based guidelines from WHO or, for example, the guidelines from the International Cancer Association altogether, and other sustainability criteria included in these guidelines could definitely change the dietary patterns towards more sustainable diets. Then, for example, what we have in relation to this? As far as I know, up to now, there are only 4 countries that have included sustainability criteria in the food-based dietary guidelines. You can see Brazil, Sweden, and Qatar. The leaders of changing these dietary guidelines have been the Nordics, and Sweden was recommending to eat more fruits and vegetables, at least 5 grams per day, and to choose high fiber, and to eat less red and processed meat, less than 5 grams per week. Now, there are more things coming up. I don't know if you are familiar with the Eat Lancet Commission that has been just published very recently. A couple of it. Somebody raise your hand if you have read this paper. Okay, good. So this new Lancet Commission is bringing a completely different picture of the proportions that have been recommended worldwide. And the paper was endorsed by WHO, by the director of WHO, and director of FAO, and there is a huge, controversial thing. Of course, when they change the plans of the livestock industry, everything gets trouble. But they are recommending like half of our plate should be vegetables. So what they are looking at is having really from 0 to very limited. If you see the amounts of meat that they are recommending, is very small, but most of the diet is based on carbohydrates or whole grains, tubers, other fruits and vegetables is the majority, and they recommend from 0 to very small amounts of meat that were not imagined before. So when people were recommending that before you have to eat this amount of meat, I think that it was not science-based. It was something that they thought that it was happening, but it was not, apparently, according to this study, and has been endorsed by the first author is Walter Willett, and he is the main nutritionist, like the guru of nutrition in the US from Harvard, and the others are also very good nutritionists. So this is something that is bringing and changing totally the conversation, and I think that more countries will be adopting these different dietary guidelines and references. So just to conclude, all these kind of studies, they come in the Lancet, and the Lancet is the first journal that has realized that tackling climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity. And this is because we address it with mitigation strategies that bring co-benefits to health. Now, how we can see that countries didn't know very much about that, right? You have seen this in the global policies. But look at now at the response of the consumers when we look at individual consumers. This is a survey that we did in the European countries, in the European Commission, of how if we should label and indicating that what is the product's carbon footprint, if it should be mandatory. This was 2009, like 10 years ago, and already almost 75% of the European consumers, they thought that this should be printed and should be a carbon footprint label in their food. And it's surprising that when I came with these figures here, people were not even thinking about linking climate change with food at all. And this links very well with the Sustainable Development Goals. So, with Sustainable Development Goal 2, 3 of health, 2 on no hunger, and the 13th. So this is the way to go, looking into these synergies of healthy and sustainable diets. And if you see, this is what we have done. One of our students prepared this, in relation to nutrition, in which they have framed the different sustainable development goals in order to address, in one side, zero hunger, but at the same time in order to address all the targets of good health. So this is it. Thank you so much for your interest, and if you have any questions, I am happy to answer now and later.
Thank you very much, Cristina, Dr. Cristina Tirado. We have a very special gift for you today. Could you please step to the center of the stage, and we would love to get a photo with you, and a signature as well. So thank you again, Dr. Tirado, for sharing with us the benefits of a vegetarian diet. So just out of curiosity, how many of you are vegetarians here? Wow. Did you raise your hand? Is it just for these 3 days, or is it for a while? Just kidding. All right, so as you can tell, cutting meat out of our diet for even just once a week, or even 1 day a week, once a week, we can help save the environment and show our compassion toward animals.
Cedars-Sinai in Beverly Hills is the largest nonprofit hospital in the western United States. It is where many celebrities go for medical needs. Dr. Shelly Liu first arrived at Cedars-Sinai as a resident in internal medicine. More than 25 years later, she has earned a distinguished position in her field. Attracted the acclaim of her peers, and built a life philosophy that she is putting to work as director of Cedars-Sinai Division of Gastroenterology. Let's give a round of applause for Dr. Shelly Liu.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Can you all hear me okay? No? Okay. You know what? I'll switch to, hold on. Let me put it on. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. So this is my, oh, what's that? Okay. They don't want me to trip, so, so hold on one sec. Okay. So this is my first time participating in this forum. So what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about the hospital that I work at, a little bit about my division, and then I will just comment on an area of research that we are very active in, okay? Okay, so let me see. Oh, it does work, okay. So Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, you know, many of you know it as the hospital for the movie stars, you know, that glitzy place in Beverly Hills. Actually, it's more than that. It is actually ranked number 8 on the U.S. World and News Report, number 8 in terms of the best hospitals. We're ranked in 12 of the adult specialties nationally. Now, I can't even read that. I'm going to have to take a look at this. These are some slides that were given to me. But the history of Cedars-Sinai is that it was established in 1902. And it's been, since the beginning, have 4 major missions. And those are kind of one of the main reasons that attracted me to Cedars-Sinai. So the first mission is that they have to provide top quality health care. That's one of their primary missions. But equally important, they embrace biomedical research, basic research, translational research, clinical research. And then thirdly, that's also of equal importance to the leadership, is training. So they have residency programs, fellowship programs, we are training the next generation of healthcare delivery leaders and also investigators. And then finally, they also want to provide better health care to the community that they serve. Okay, so again, Cedars-Sinai is one of the largest nonprofit medical centers in the Western United States. We have close to 900 beds. Each year, we have 50,000 admissions to the hospital. 90,000 emergency room visits. Is one of the busiest emergency rooms. And 7,000 babies born each year. More than almost 15,000 people work there full time, which explains why the parking is usually very difficult if you get there late. And 2,100 physicians and on the medical staff, more than 3,000 nurses, and 2,500 volunteers. So we have a lot of people working at Cedars. Now, I went to UCLA Medical School and undergrad as well, even though originally I am from Taiwan. And when I went through training in internal medicine, Cedars-Sinai that was it. That was the hospital. But in the past several decades now, Cedars has acquired multiple clinics, practices. This is now the Cedars-Sinai enterprise. So they have now affiliated with a hospital in Torrance. They have a hospital in Marina del Rey. They're branching out into the east side, Arcadia. Okay? So Cedars-Sinai is having a very wide footprint now in Southern California. So let me tell you a little bit more about the research that goes on at Cedars-Sinai. So there's all levels. I'm actually a physician scientist. I'm a bench researcher. Okay, so I have a wet lab. But translational research is really something they emphasize. They're ranked among the nation's top independent hospitals with NIH funding. Okay? We have more than 900 active research projects, more than 500 clinical trials, more than 200 principal investigators. Many of them are PhDs that gave up a 10-year professor position, like me, and joined Cedars-Sinai. Okay? And more than 500 faculty members and 700 research staff. We have our own PhD program. We also have our own master's program. So you can see that research and education are really vitally important to the leadership. This is a major training center. I was a UCLA medical student, and even back then, Cedars-Sinai was one of the most popular hospitals for training. Okay? They get almost 300 residents and fellows in graduate medical programs, residencies, fellowship, and 85 specialties and subspecialties. And we do have one of the largest internal medicine residency program, 108 residents, support almost 800 medical students rotations. And we have clinical programs also for nursing students from all over the country. Okay. This is not moving. It's stuck. Oh, okay. All right. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Digestive and Liver Diseases Division that I direct. So the Cedars as a whole, as a hospital, is ranked number 8. But my division and GI surgery, we're ranked number 3. Ahead of us is Mayo Clinic, number 1, Cleveland Clinic, number 2. Okay? We're even above Mass General. Within my division, we are strong in several areas within gastroenterology where we have world-renowned experts. Experts in inflammatory bowel disease, in motility, and this would include irritable bowel syndrome for those of you who may be familiar with the term. We have pancreatic biliary program that's very, very strong. We have a strong liver program that I will tell you a little bit more about. Health services research, another term for it is outcome research. It's huge for my division. And I just added a little over a year ago a small bowel disease and nutrition subdivision. And all these subdivisions are brought together by a training program that we have in gastroenterology. So we have our own fellowship training program. In addition, Cedars, through an entity called the Medical Delivery Network, they own practices in our community. So these community gastroenterologists are also involved in training our fellows. Okay, our fellows rotate to their clinics and spend time with them. So this is a list of the faculties in my division right now. Super strong is IBD. They're world-renowned. In fact, at Cedars-Sinai, this is one of very few hospitals in the United States where we have an inpatient IBD ward, because the sickest, the most hard-to-treat IBD patients are often sent to us. Okay? We also have world-renowned endoscopists. Simon Lowe is very famous for interventional procedures. So we have patients from all over the world coming to see him. So this is the pancreatic biliary group, health services research, motility group. Mark Pimentel is well known and famous for having the patent on using rifaximin to treat IBS, diarrhea predominant. So this is a patent that was developed by Mark Pimentel. Okay? And then they recruited me to lead a division and also build liver research. So I joined Cedars-Sinai a little over 4.5 years ago. So our faculty, the full-time faculty, are very, very academic. We serve on a number of major journals with editorial positions. So this, you can see 11 of us sit on major journals like Gastroenterology, American Journal of Gastroenterology. These are all top journals for my field. Now, the one thing that is remarkable, because prior to coming over to Cedars, I was at USC for almost 25 years. And at USC, you know, we had a large number of faculties. At Cedars, even though our faculty number is not that high, it's, you know, not even 50, the amount of funding that we have in 1 year exceeds 20 million. That's for 1 year only among my faculty. And in addition, new grants that were acquired just in 1 year was almost $22 million. So this is a very academic division. I'm very, very proud of their achievements. We publish extensively, almost 200 papers, and they're in very high impact journals like Nature, Science, Cancer Cell, Gastroenterology, and so on and so forth. We do a lot of clinical trials in various areas. IBD, again, that's inflammatory bowel disease, motility, pancreatic biliary, health services research, almost 180 active clinical trials. So now I'm going to spend the rest of my time telling you about a global epidemic. I assume that most of you are already familiar with this. This is an entity called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. In medical term, we often call it NAFL. Okay? So I'm going to tell you a story from discovery to patient care for a silent epidemic. So first, I'm going to summarize the global impact and how NAFL can develop. Then I'm going to tell you how we are developing personalized treatment at Cedars-Sinai. And I will then also describe a little bit for you the liver and NAFL research that's going on at Cedars-Sinai. So, a few key facts about NAFL. NAFL stands for fatty liver that occurs in the absence of significant drinking. Okay? So, less than 3 drinks a day for men and less than 2 for women, or any other known causes of fatty liver. So for instance, there are drugs that can cause fatty liver, so you have to exclude those. NAFL covers a spectrum. We go from just fat in the liver, we call it simple fat, to fat plus inflammation. This is called steatohepatitis or non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, and in medical term, we call it NASH. Okay? Now, NASH can have either no fibrosis or a lot of fibrosis. Then it can proceed to develop cirrhosis and finally liver cancer. Okay? This is now a very common reason for liver transplantation. In fact, among women, this is the leading reason for liver transplantation. By 2020, it is estimated this will be the #1 reason for liver transplant. The global impact is immense because right now, 25% of the global population have fatty liver. In the United States, it's about a third of the population have fatty liver disease, okay? And if you look at individuals that are morbidly obese, by that I mean a BMI that is more than 40, okay? Almost all of them have fatty liver. Now, you may have seen this kind of a graph before. You can see that over the past several decades, United States went from a blue country to a mainly red country. And I don't mean Democrats and Republicans, okay? All right. So the bluer you are, the lower the BMI, okay? So for Western countries, we use a BMI of 25. 25 or higher is overweight. 30 or higher is obesity, okay? But we cannot use that for Asian patients. In Asians, a BMI that is overweight is 23, okay? So you should not be using 25 when you're looking at your patients, trying to advise them if they are overweight or not. It's really 23. And also, Asians tend to carry the fat in the central region. We call it kind of an apple shape instead of a pear shape, okay? And the apple shape is the one that is bad for fatty liver, okay? If you look at what's going on in the US, now 1/3 of the children and 2/3 of adults are overweight or obese. And globally, 2 billion people are overweight, 600 million are obese. This is a pandemic of astronomical proportions because, as you know, obesity is linked to so many diseases, and I'm only telling you one, and that's how it impacts the liver. So the spectrum of fatty liver disease, you go from a healthy liver, about, again, I'm using the global number, 25% of them have fatty liver. And of these people, oops, what happened? This one totally, okay. I thought I touched something. All right. And then another 25% can develop this more progressive one, fatty liver with inflammation and variable scarring, okay, that we call NASH. And then from here, another 10 to 20% will progress to develop cirrhosis, which is this end-stage liver disease where the liver is really, really hard, okay? And another 1 to 7% then develop liver cancer. Cirrhosis is the #1 risk factor for liver cancer. Now, what is predisposing all these progression? Obesity, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, hypertension, and hyperlipidemia, the metabolic syndrome. So fatty liver is the liver manifestation of the metabolic syndrome. Now, progression of NAFL. It takes time for these things to develop. Typically, we think that from NAFL, NASH, to cirrhosis, take about 10 years, and about 30% will go on to do this. And then to liver cancer could take another 10 years. And then again, of these people, we think up to 30%. I just told you cirrhosis is the #1 risk factor for liver cancer. What is very scary about fatty liver is now we are seeing a lot of patients coming in with liver cancer and fatty liver, and they don't have cirrhosis. No cirrhosis. Some of them don't even have NASH. So in other words, there are some individuals that can skip these and go straight from fatty liver to fatty liver with liver cancer. No question about it, presence of fat in the liver makes it a good environment for cancer to grow. Okay? Now, this is some epidemiological studies, outcome studies that look at NASH patients with no scarring or with scarring. And no question, the amount of scarring determines survival of these patients. If they have no scarring, they will survive much longer. So whatever the treatment we have to come up with has to minimize scarring, has to stop the progression to scarring, okay? But that actually still does not address the higher frequency of liver cancer. Now, this is looking at the proportion of liver cancers that's caused by various etiologies. And in orange is the part that is caused by fatty liver. And you can see that from 2000 to 2016, or 2010 rather, the proportion that's attributable to fatty liver disease has already increased so much. And we are now another decade later, so this is even greater. So, not only is there an increased risk for liver cancer, and the risk is 17-fold, by the way, having fat in the liver seems to also double the risk of colon cancer in men. By mechanisms we're not sure, okay? And doubles the risk of breast cancer in women. Again, we don't know how this is occurring. Obviously, the liver is releasing stuff to the systemic circulation. There may be a lot of crosstalk among different tissues and organs. So, a hot area of research. Okay, so how does the liver then accumulate fat? So this is a very simple scheme. So here the liver, the fat can go up if there's more delivery into the liver. Delivery from the food that we eat, fat, and even sugar. Because when you eat sugar, it goes into the liver and gets converted to fat. Okay? That's why high sugar diet is bad for fatty liver, especially fructose. And adipose tissue also delivers fat to the liver. That's why very obese patients will have increased delivery of fat into the liver from the adipose tissue. Okay? So this is a big one. There can also be new synthesis of fat. So we call it de novo lipogenesis. Then fat can be burned, and in the cell, mitochondria is the organelle that will burn fat. We call it fatty acid oxidation. And then finally, the liver can export it out in the form of very low density lipoprotein, VLDL. Okay? So again, too much fat coming from adipose tissue or something we eat, increased fat synthesis, decreased burning, or decreased fat export. In patients with fatty liver disease, it's usually the increased uptake and decreased fat export that play the major pathogenetic roles. Okay? All right. So what are the pressing issues that face us, especially those of us that work in liver? Well, we still don't quite understand what are the factors that promote progression from simple fat to NASH, and NASH with fibrosis. Okay? We still don't quite know. We don't have non-invasive biomarkers. Right now, we have to do liver biopsy, although now imaging has improved a great deal, so there is an MRI imaging study that can be done to estimate the amount of fibrosis and to also quantify the amount of fat in the liver. Okay? That's a very specialized MRI that not a lot of hospitals have because it requires a very expensive software. Okay? And we don't have any approved medical treatment. When we have a fatty liver patient, all we can tell them to do Lose 10% of your body weight, exercise. Aerobic exercise, weight training exercise, equally important, okay? But the target is 10% weight loss. There's plenty of data that show if you can achieve 10% weight loss, you will slow the progression, stop the progression, may even revert the damage, okay? But to tell them to lose 10% of their body weight is very difficult, okay? Even having them exercise regularly is tough. So we really need medications, right? So I'm going to tell you about a molecule that I've worked on for over 20 years now. It's called acetylmethionine, or SAMe. You have seen it in drugstores. You've seen it at Costco. In the United States, it's actually a supplement. But outside of the United States, in Europe and Asia, it's a medication that you have to prescribe, okay? Why is it a supplement here? I think they were just trying to bypass the FDA. That's how they got it in as a supplement. Well, it's a supplement because we make it in all of our cells. So they argue that it's therefore a supplement. And it is essential for life, and I will show you why. Made in all cells. It controls critical reactions within our cell, okay? Because it becomes part of other molecules. And this is how it works. So, methionine and ATP. Now, methionine is an amino acid. It's called an essential amino acid because you have to eat it. We don't make it ourselves. You eat it, and what's rich in it? Meat. So meat diet has a lot of methionine, okay? So methionine with ATP in the presence of an enzyme that is encoded by this gene called MAT1A makes acetylmethionine. Acetylmethionine has a CH3 group. In chemistry, this is called a methyl group. And what it does is that there are these enzymes that will cut it off and deliver it to a long list of acceptor molecules. So we have DNA, RNA, protein, lipids. SAMe is a methyl donor. It donates the methyl group. And when you methylate DNA, you will change gene expression. When you methylate a protein, you change the protein's activity. When you methylate lipids, you actually change the plasma membrane fluidity. And that is why SAMe is so important. You cannot be without SAMe. Okay? So many years ago, my lab developed what's called a MAT1A knockout mouse model because we wanted to understand what are the consequences of not having enough SAMe. And why is that important? The reason is patients with liver disease don't make enough SAMe. MAT1A, that gene that is required, is expressed at a low level, and whatever that is still expressed gets inactivated. So patients with chronic liver disease have reduced hepatic SAMe levels. So we wanted to know what are the consequences. At a young age, they seem quite normal, but they are very prone to develop fatty liver. So this is a young animal fed a diet called choline deficient diet for 6 days. Wild type, normal mouse, nothing happens. They knock out massive fatty liver. All these holes are basically fat. By 8 months, on a normal diet, these mice develop NASH. By 18 months, they all develop liver cancer. So this is an illustration that if you chronically have low liver SAMe level, at least in the mouse, you will be prone to develop a liver injury, fatty liver, NASH, and finally liver cancer. Okay? So what about treating these mice with SAMe? So here is one experiment, paper that was published a couple years ago, where we took older mice that already developed NASH, okay? And they were put on SAMe for 2 months. So this is just normal control. These are MAT1A knockouts given a buffer, placebo control. So the red stain is lipid. So continue to accumulate lipid. And here, the red staining here is staining for scar tissue. So kept developing more scar tissue. But the animals that received SAMe for the 2 months, much less lipid and no scar tissue. In addition, we also show that these mice were developing preneoplastic nodules, and that was also inhibited by SAMI. Okay? So, in collaboration with a group in Spain, we've been interested to look at biomarkers. So we used this knockout mouse model, and we looked at the metabolites in the blood and metabolites in the liver. And we found that the metabolite levels agree with each other. So we can use the serum to tell us what's going on in the liver, okay? And in that terminology is called liquid biopsy. So instead of doing a needle biopsy that's invasive, you can just draw blood and get a liquid biopsy that tells you what's going on in the liver. So what we found was there is actually a signature of these metabolites from the knockout mouse model, and that 50% of patients with fatty liver had this signature, which would suggest to us that these patients with the M signature may be perfect patients for you to treat them with S-adenosine methionine. And that's actually a clinical trial that we're about to start at Cedars-Sinai. Okay. Okay, it's not moving. It's stuck again. Okay, here we go. All right. So let me just tell you a little bit more about the other areas of research that's related to fatty liver. So I mentioned biomarker development, personalized treatment. That's an area that my lab is very actively engaged in. I'm also involved with a group of investigators. We're looking at how fat in the liver makes the liver more prone to cancer metastasis. So this is unpublished data. We just submitted a big grant to the NIH, and we're hoping it'll get funded. This is one of the investigators, Dr. Seki, that I recruited to Cedars. This is his preliminary data where you can see when an animal is given high-fat diet for a few weeks and has fatty liver, the colon cancer grew like crazy, okay? So in the presence of fatty liver, this becomes an environment that is very, very welcoming to cancer metastasis. We have a very busy clinical fatty liver program that Mazan Nuruddin, one of my mentees that I recruited, he runs, and he is helped by these hepatologists. We incorporate the state-of-the-art imaging that I mentioned to you, the MRI. He has multiple clinical trials. Some are recruiting patients with fibrosis, and they all collaborate with NIH-funded investigators, okay? And in general, the liver research at Cedars, we bring in $2 million a year from NIH funding. Industry, another $4 million. Last year, they did 120 liver transplants. But more importantly, their survival was among the very best in the country. 20 clinical trials, mostly in fatty liver. And I am currently starting to develop a multidisciplinary liver cancer program. Okay, so I've been busy in the recruitment for that. So that's it. That's a quick intro to Cedars-Sinai, and this is the hospital. Yeah, so it's a great place to work. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. We have some small present for you. Would you like to stand on the stage? And thank you. It's an outstanding speech.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shelly Liu, for sharing with us your expertise on fatty liver disease. As everyone knows, a balanced diet is important for your health. The snacks that the culinary team have prepared aren't too sweet, so eat as much as you like. But remember to exercise afterwards.
Aaron Hagedorn is an associate professor of gerontology at the University of Southern California. He teaches courses on personality assessment across the generations, global health and aging, mind and body connections, technology designed for older adults, and interdisciplinary perspectives on aging. His recent research focuses on the impact of virtual reality on mood and loss of control in older adults who are socially isolated. Please welcome Professor Aaron Hagedorn, and moderating this is Susan Wong from AARP.
Thank you. Thank you all for having us here today. Welcome to Southern California. My name is Susan Wang, and do we have a next slide? So many of you probably don't know about AARP. AARP is the largest nonprofit organization for 50 plus. We serve anybody that's 50 years and older. We currently have 38 million members. And I've been there 29 years. And we are sorry that Ms. Katherine Kirchhoff cannot be with us today. But we are very lucky to have Dr. Aaron Hagedorn with us. So Dr. Hagedorn, I know you are the expert in aging and innovation, and you are teaching several classes at USC, and you have published many research articles and chapters in books. And I know one of your specialty is about loneliness and social isolation. Next slide. Next slide. And can you talk a little about your research in social isolation and loneliness?
Thank you so much, everyone. Daja hao. Thank you. All right. It's really an honor to be able to join you guys today. For the last 9 years, I've been teaching this class called Technological Innovations for an Aging Society, where we explore all the different technologies that can help older people stay home longer and maintain positive mental health. As we know, a lot of people, they want to stay home and they want to be fully capable as much as they can. And there's a lot of technologies that can make a big difference. So we're going to share with you today some of those and talk about how artificial intelligence and deep neural networks, and I'll explain a little bit how those are created and how that technology can play a really important role in keeping us at home longer and maintaining a really good mental health.
Next slide, please.
And one more slide. Next slide. All right. So recently I've become very interested in this idea of loneliness in older adults, because it turns out, according to the American Psychological Association, 60% of visits to the doctor aren't for physical problems as much as they are for issues that are mental health in nature. People go to the doctor sometimes because they're lonely. They want someone to talk to. They feel pain more severely if they don't have someone to share their life with. They feel their symptoms more strongly if their mental health is not good. And so being able to address the mental health is really important. And around 1/3 of adults are lonely. They say they don't have someone to turn to when they need that companionship. And interestingly, loneliness peaks in midlife, around your mid-40s. In mid-40s, around 40% of people report severe loneliness at some point in their life. And as we get older, it decreases. There's actually a decline in people reporting loneliness. But I don't think it's because we suddenly have more friends and our life is better. It's just our expectations change. And we're going to talk about that later, about as we get older, what we're looking for is no longer as extreme. There's this idea of socio-emotional selectivity, that as you feel you have less future to worry about, you narrow your interests down to just the things that are more important to you, and instead of seeking out new friendships, you seek out better quality relationships with the people you already have. And so we can use this idea of artificial intelligence to understand what issues are important to you. And in my personality class, we talk about different ways to identify who you are and what's important. And this idea of personal constructs, and these are the words that are part of your core vocabulary and you repeat over and over again. And if they're very positive words, you're an upbeat, optimistic person. And if they're negative words, then you're a pessimist. And there are ways that we can reinforce positive thought. And I'll talk about some of the technologies out there that might help us improve our mood. So there's this scale there that's showing you different questions. And I really like question number 3. I experience a general sense of emptiness, because I've learned through Master Chen Yen that Buddhism thinks everything is emptiness. It is, there's some truth. The world is how you perceive it. And you can perceive the emptiness and dwell on that, or you can fill that emptiness with different ways of thinking. And so this is the scale that we use in my research. We begin with asking them these questions, and we can score how lonely people are. And I'm actively seeking out older adults that are particularly lonely. And we have a series of interventions that we're doing with virtual reality and Alexa, this chatbot that you can talk to and ask questions. Can I get the next slide? So it's just coincidental that I'm reporting on an AARP study with a representative here. But, and these are those statistics that I talked about earlier. One of the interesting things that surprised me is even married people can report that they're lonely. And that, there's somebody there, but sometimes you want to talk about something, you talk differently with strangers, in a sense, and you need a group of friends. And as we get older, we're also more likely to maybe not have somebody with us at all moments. And so to have this group of people to turn to is very important. Next slide. And as we get older, there are many things that can happen to us that can cause us true reasons to feel unhappy or lonely. And be it relationship issues or physical health challenges, like losing your vision gradually or your hearing. Turns out everybody has some hearing loss as we get older. We call it presbycusis. So we all experience some, particularly high-pitched sounds. So for men, we don't necessarily hear our wife's voice. It's okay to say, I didn't hear you. Very high-pitched voices are harder for older people to hear in general. And children can hear high-pitched tones that adults can't, and that's because there's damage to our inner ears that cannot be repaired. And it gets frustrating. And for people that lose all hearing, people that have profound hearing loss, they're 4 times more likely to have Alzheimer's disease. And that's because when you don't hear well, you don't socialize. When you don't socialize, you don't challenge your mind. Turns out one of the best activities you can do to challenge your brain is to talk to people, to have friends, because your mind has to think about many different topics and know how to react. That's a really good cognitive exercise. People with hearing loss don't get that cognitive exercise, and they lose what we call cognitive reserve. So your brain, through practice, maintains its ability, and without practice, there's this gradual decline that we all could experience, and happens more rapidly if you don't hear. So,
Dr. Hagedorn, may I ask, I think it's important that we differentiate loneliness and social isolation. Loneliness is a perception that we have for ourselves, but social isolation is a condition that people are limited to their own homes or their own environment because of different decline in health, or they cannot go out, or no transportation. Can you talk a little about the 2 differences?
Sure. Yeah. And the technologies that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes are really directed at the people that are socially isolated, people for whom there isn't someone to turn to, because the best, of course, is a person, a real friend, a real companion. But so loneliness is this self-perception. And there's this idea that, based on self-efficacy, Albert Bandura would tell us that self-efficacy is a critical component of who we are. And as we get older, or if we have health problems, we gain this kind of learned self-helpless, what's it called? learn dependency. When we feel we can't do things, we do less and less. And so loneliness is what happens when, over time, as a result of not seeking out friends and learned helplessness, you stop putting any effort into it. And so it's a mood that one can, under the right conditions, improve. But many people that are lonely aren't interested in getting out and meeting new people or calling, initiating a phone call, initiating communication with somebody that might help. Versus social isolation, it really isn't an option. Where they are, maybe they can't hear, so they can't talk, or they're too far away and they don't have the right technology to reach to the right people.
Thank you.
Can we see the next slide? So I'm a gerontologist. Means I'm interested in older adults and older people. And they're very different than people in midlife or children. Some people think it's kind of weird how you can be focused on an age group and not a particular field. And I think it's really important that we understand that as we get older, our perception of the world is different. And everyone is a little bit different depending on your personality and life experiences and the things that really matter to you. But we all face similar kind of threats to our health and our capabilities as we get older. Some of it universal, like gradual hearing loss and presbyopia, the changes in the eye so that your vision becomes less acute. We all experience that to varying degrees. And some of it results of the environment and our perception of the environment. And so I would think that as you get older, you're at higher risk of being socially isolated and needing some kind of intervention, needing some people to talk to, or a program that can help give you someone a way to release your emotions and to feel like you are the person you want to be. Can we get the next slide? And prior to the 1990s, we used to think mental health is one issue and physical health is another. They're not directly connected. But gradually we're finding that this mind-body connection is real. And Buddhism was onto something from the very start, that everything is connected. And what you think, how you perceive the world, greatly affects your reality and greatly affects how your body will age. And so there's a study done that shows the impact of feeling lonely, reporting a very high number on the loneliness scale, is just as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So very serious. And it's worse for you than obesity. So some of the things that we think are bad for our health and what we eat and what we do for our hobbies, feeling lonely is just as bad. And it's an additive effect. So if you're lonely and you turn to smoking and you do other bad health behaviors, your health will decline much more rapidly. You're at much higher risk of disease. And people that report lonely, they die at much faster rates. And that's one of the reasons why after the death of a spouse, we see a 40% rise in the risk of mortality the next 3 months. A lot of times after one person dies, the next one goes quickly because of that increased loneliness. Next slide. And there's a biological mechanism that happens in the brain when you feel lonely. And it's the same stress response that you feel as if you feel on stage and you're very nervous. It's the same kind of stress response when you're under threat and you need to react. So our bodies have this fight or flight response designed to give you energy when there's an emergency. It makes your heart race, it makes your mouth dry, makes you, at first, in short term, you heal injuries more quickly under stress, but under long term, it slows down the immune system and you're at higher risk of chronic disease. So it's through this called hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, stress response in the brain, that our brain perceives stress and leads to physiological changes in hormone levels that were meant to give you an increased chance of survival. But if we're chronically under stress or chronically in bad mental health, then our bodies will experience the negative effects of stress. And so being lonely is just as stressful as having some pressure or having financial problems or marital problems or any other major stress. Get the next slide, please. And a lot of technology starts off as something that makes sense for young people. And it's marketed to young people, it's developed by young people, and many older people at first don't know how they fit into it. But over time, it becomes something for all ages. So this is looking at WeChat, an app many of you may know. I know Line may be more popular in
Probably Line for Taiwan.
Right.
Yeah, people from Taiwan.
I only found this particular data. But it's the same story for Facebook. And that's that the average user is getting older and older over time. It starts off as something that young people use to talk to their friends, but over time, as more people discover it, they find it's useful. And one of the advantages of Line or WeChat or any similar app is that you can create friendships and reinforce friendships with people wherever they are and any time. And so this shows in a very short period of time what a dramatic shift we see in the average age of the users. And many older adults I find spend a lot of time on these apps, forming friendships. And a lot of research has been showing that social media is bad, that more time on Facebook is associated with higher depression, right? And this FOMO, fear of missing out. And that's true for young people. But the studies on older adults show the opposite is true, because older people are less concerned about missing out on activities and more concerned about being unaware of what's going on with their family and their friends. And they interpret what they see differently. Rather than being jealous of how good she looks or how happy she is, they tend to think, oh, I'm so excited to see how happy she is and how good she looks. So it's the idea that the perspective is very different. And so I think social media, Facebook and similar kind of social media is actually a net positive for older adults because it keeps them in the loop and it teaches them about the world in ways that they might not have felt included before.
That's very good.
So Susan, I'm curious now if you have anything to share with us about the environment and how older adults can, through the environment, feel less isolated.
Thank you, Dr. Hagedorn. We are seeing a trend in the past, especially for Asians. We like to aging in place or 在家养老. But because of the social isolation and loneliness issue, we are seeing a trend that more and more older adults are moving into what they call the CCRC community. CCRC is continuing care retirement community.
Can we get the next slide, please?
Next slide. So these communities, they usually include meals, transportation, social activities, security, and they have like nurses on site. And next slide. And housekeeping, so people don't have to cook, you don't have to clean anymore in this kind of environment. And you are living with people similar to your age, and you are doing things together to combat social isolation and loneliness. Next slide. So we have 104 CCRCs in California. 65% are multi-sites, meaning they are owned by corporations. They have many sites. And I want to give you an example here. Next slide. This is Montecerto in Altadena, about 20 minutes from here. It's a brand new CCRC with about 286 units. We just had a tour of this facility because we have two groups of investors from Taiwan and China, and they are all invested they are all interested in investing in CCRCs in China and Taiwan. And this is resort-like, hotel-like, everything included. And they have different levels from independent living to assisted living nursing facilities and dementia and Alzheimer facility. They call memory care. Next slide. So this is a typical living room for a CCRC. Very large, very roomy, and very safe. Next slide. And this is a typical bedroom for a CCRC facility. And these are not cheap. The entry point for this facility is about $460,000 to $1 million. And the monthly fee is about $5,000. So it's not for lower income, but I heard from the investors from Taiwan and China, they are all building higher end CCRCs.
So just to clarify, there's an entrance fee around $250,000 to $500,000 or up to $1 million. And that they invest that money and you get 90% of it back if you move out or pass away. So that money is just kind of held in trust, and they use that money as a way to offset some of the costs of the monthly fee, which, as you mentioned, $5,000 to $10,000 or so at this particular facility, but it's up to $20,000 a month at some of the highest end facilities. And so you see this, it serves a really beautiful space, and you have people you can call for help 24 hours a day, and they feed you whatever you ask for. So, and they monitor what you eat. So it's ideal. This is kind of a great thing. However, as you're saying, it really only serves the top 10% of people financially. So.
Right. So when we think about aging in place, we may want to rethink instead of staying at home, because we know a lot of times, especially in Taiwan and Asian countries, we hire in-home care, but still the older people are at home most of the time with a caregiver, and they are really not with their friends or with their community. So when we think about aging in place, we want to think broadly, what is the new aging in place? Is it still at home or is it in a CCRC community? Now, going back to you, Dr. Hagedorn, can you share more about other high-tech innovation to help people to age more successfully?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really hope places like this succeed, because at our school we train people to be the managers of these programs and to develop programs that can really benefit people. But, and we used to think that there's going to be a boom of nursing homes and assisted livings right around now, because the baby boom generation is retiring and they should be financially well off, relatively speaking. But there really isn't that boom in construction. And in fact, California hasn't built a new nursing home since 1994. And actually, there'll never be a new nursing home in California because the regulations are so strict and the profit margin is so narrow. Profit margin is around 1% on average. The most profitable facilities tend to provide the least amount of services. They have the fewer staff. And many nursing homes are losing money. And these continuing care retirement communities offer that skilled nursing as part of their package. So you get independent living, assisted living, or skilled nursing. We're really seeing kind of a decline in that and a shift towards aging in place wherever possible. The technology is going to make it more possible. We get the next slide? And one more. So when we think about technologies, one of those out there is, of course, a simple app. And when apps first came out in 2007, we were all excited that apps can change the world. And in my class, we began designing apps and testing out apps on people, and we thought, this is the future. But how many apps do you guys use on your phone in a typical day? Yell out a number. I'm curious. 3, 7, 6, 5. All right. A few. I'm seeing a 4 up there, 5. Yeah, so there's a couple apps that you use. And my kids love to install new games that they discover all the time. So young people install and play a lot, but as we get older, we tend to narrow it down, right? We'll use Line or a few important apps, reminders, calendar, things like that, but not necessarily. So to create an app costs around $50,000 if you want to create an app. That's what a developer will charge you for the programming and the server behind the scenes. And there are many businesses out there that use the app as their primary connection to the community. This was one that was designed for people that are caregivers in the community. They could have someone to talk to, so you can find companion caregivers. There's another one out there called Join Honor that allows you to find a caregiver. And it's just like Tinder in the sense that you can swipe right or swipe left, looking at their profile and saying that this is the person that's right for me or my mother or father. This is the person who's not. You can see their kind of resume and their picture and get an assumption based on that. So a lot of companies develop apps. They invest a lot of money, $50,000 to $100,000 to make a good product. And yet, how much are you guys willing to pay for apps? Very little, right? Many people, it's free is good.
Nothing.
Yeah?
Zero is better.
Almost everyone doesn't want to pay anything for an app. So there has to be some trick that that company can do to generate some revenue beyond that. And well, most apps turn out not to be a successful approach. And getting people to use an app is actually very difficult. I was involved in a study in Taiwan that we were diabetes self-management app. People had to input in the app their blood sugar, their blood pressure, what they ate, what they drank, how often they went to the restroom, how many hours they slept, their mood, their medications. You input all this data, and based on this theory that inputting the data makes you more conscientious, and makes you pay more attention. So when you pay more attention to what you eat, what you drink, when you took your medications, you'll be more consistent. But people don't use that app very long. So you encourage it, they use it for the first couple of days, and then fewer and fewer and fewer people use it over time. So apps may not be the perfect approach, but it's something out there. Can we hit the next slide? There's a lot of hope for autonomous cars. That can certainly help people stay home more, and that will help people that are isolated, that shouldn't be driving. And the Teslas out there can already do a lot of this. So I believe that technology isn't maybe terribly far away to helping out. And at the very least, Uber and Lyft make life a little bit easier. And here we have the Amazon Alexa. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can use that existing device to make a really big difference in their life. How many of you have Alexa or Google Home or the Apple Play? All right, I can see about a third of you or so seem to have this at home already. And do you talk to it? Do you use it? Some? Yeah. So we've done some experiments on older people with this. We put it in their home and we tell them that you could ask it questions and you can talk to it. And it turns out with very minimal instructions, on average, people will ask about 5 questions a day to Alexa. Like for me, it's always, what's Trump's latest tweet? I get a sense of what he's saying. And you can try that. She'll tell you, and sometimes you'll get a chuckle what she says. And you can tell you the news and the weather and the traffic if you set your destination. So it's great. You can talk to it. And it turns out older people do like this idea of being able to ask questions. Turns out you could do a lot more with it than just ask, how tall is Mount Everest? You can personalize it. There's a website called Amazon Blueprints. And with Amazon Blueprints, there's a bunch of forms you can fill out answering questions about the names of people in the home or the family and the things that they like. And then you can customize conversations. And you can create interactive stories that reference people in their lives or events in their life and make it actually something you can have a conversation with. So in the past, it took a lot of programming skills. Now, anybody could do it over the course of 3 minutes on blueprints.amazon.com. You can create a conversation skill, and then you just enable that skill, and then by remote, you can have a conversation with somebody. And so this is one exciting technology.
I just wanted to add that we have heard successful stories about using Alexa for patients with dementia. And a lot of patients, they ask many times, what's for lunch? Or what's the weather? What time is it? So you can program your Alexa to answer this type of questions so the spouse won't go crazy, answering 30 times a day.
Yeah, that's the real use of it, is people that they're difficult to talk to or bother people, and so it gives them someone to talk to. And normally you have to keep saying Alexa before she'll listen, right? But if you create these personalized skills, then you don't have to constantly do that. And so you can just repeat the same answers and listen for keywords. It also allows you can log into the app and see what the conversation was, and based on that, you can modify it going forward. It requires a person to do that, and in my class, we're trying to create this kind of this thinking. Think like the person and develop that conversation. So it requires you really get in the mind of the user and assess who they are. Can we get the next slide? All right. Some of you are getting continuing education units, so we have to make sure I have some academic component. So this is true gerontology I'm teaching you. This is andragogical principles, andragogy. Any of you heard of andragogy before? So I'm sure you've all heard of pedagogy, right? Pedagogy is the principles of teaching children and the principles of learning. And in pedagogy, we know kids learn through play, kids learn through discovery, through experimentation, and they're motivated learners just in general. They want to understand how the world works. As we get older, our thinking changes. And so this andragogical principles is how older learners learn. And the idea that older people might not be so willing to break their toys, they might not be so interested in learning something that's totally useless to their life. As we get older, we're motivated to learn, but particularly things that relate to what we need to do. So if we worked in the medical field, we care about topics related to our expertise. If it's about expertise, we're really excited. If it's unrelated, less interested. Versus a young person doesn't know what's important yet, so they might be equally interested across many topics. And so when we're designing technology for older people, it's really important to bear in mind that older adults don't initiate the same way as young people, and it has to be very relevant to them. And so this idea of, as our self-concept moves from being dependent towards self-directed, and so we want to be independent, but as we get older, some people become more learn-dependent, and we can undo that because we're naturally want to be independent. And we have a growing reservoir of experience, and we like things that are very similar to our past. So I do some experiments in virtual reality where we put people in these 360 videos. So you look around and things are happening, you're in a new place. And I put half of the people in the room in Sri Lanka, where they're exploring a temple in Sri Lanka. Very beautiful, ornate place. Any tourist would love to explore there. And I put half the people in downtown Los Angeles, just a random street in Los Angeles, but some landmarks that are familiar. What do you think people like? They like exploring a Sri Lankan temple or just being on the street in the middle of downtown LA? You would think Sri Lanka. And young people love the Sri Lanka. But the older people, they have no interest in the Sri Lanka unless they were global travelers. If that was their interest, they love traveling, then they're interested. In general, they like something familiar, like, oh, I know this place. This is cool. I'm in this familiar place. And so it turns out our goal sometimes, and the way we approach for older people is very different. Just showing them their front yard or in the Google Earth. Google Earth has this great app that you can put any address and you can see it. Just showing them their front yard makes them much more happier than taking them to some exotic place. Unless it's a familiar exotic place. So familiarity is really important. And as we get older, that familiarity is more and more important because we want to matter, we want our lives to matter, and we feel we matter less and less to some degree unless we can see who we are reflected in our experience. So, and people become focused increasingly on their social roles as they get older. So they identify with being a mother, a father, a leader of an organization, their profession to some degree. So that's one hook when we're trying to get people involved in studies or get them to try something new, is to hook that identity somehow. Get the next slide. Let's see. As we get older, our perspective changes from postponed application of knowledge, which is pedagogy. We're teaching kids math without necessarily knowing why they need the math yet, but eventually they'll need it, to immediacy of application. So people care about things that are important here and now because here and now matters. And as a result, their orientation shifts from one of subject-centeredness to one of problem-centeredness. So our approach is, rather than saying I'm going to teach you about artificial intelligence, which I'm about to do, young people like to know about artificial intelligence. Older people may not be so motivated to learn unless they know why. So I'm going to tell you why. Maybe you'll pay more attention to the video we're about to show. So you need to know about how deep neural networks work, because this is the future of how computers are going to work. In the past, we understood the world through inferential statistics. Basically, what's the average number of any particular number? So what's how many calories do I need to eat? How much vitamin C do I need? How much vitamin E? So all these ideas of how much you need to eat is just average. And the average may not apply to you individually. And now we are creating algorithms that look at data on large numbers of people, and we can personalize it. So based on someone of your size and your age and your gender and your socioeconomic status and your region, now we can say you should eat this way and personalize it. And we use this principle called microsimulation to do this. So we collect data on large numbers of people, as much as we can, and we create this model that creates an equation that describes that data, and then we can run the simulation that the computer repeats over and over and over again. For people that aren't real, but they have characteristics just like real people, and we can predict what a change in life. And based on that, we can suggest changes in lifestyle that might be more specific to you. So this is why you need to understand the deep neural network, because you'll understand what data is important and how we're using it. All right? Okay. And this idea that our internal motivation is really important. We only do things that we want to do as we get older. With kids, gamification works very well, giving them rewards and points and competition, that works very well. With older people, less. So they're less interested in winning, more interested in proving that they can still do things and have the same level as earlier. Next slide. Next slide. All right. This is the first application of the artificial intelligence. Then I'll show you how it's made. So if you can play this video. This is probably not out yet, but it's an example. Let's see if the sound works. If it doesn't matter.
Mary, Megan sent a new photo. Would you like to look at it?
Yes, please. Oh, he's a gem.
Would you like to respond to Megan's post?
Sure.
Recording in 3, 2, 1.
LEQ reminds me to take my meds, arranges rides for me. She even reminds me of all my appointments.
Mary, don't forget bridge with the Golden Girls at 1 p.m. Would you like to practice?
Oh, I don't need to practice.
I didn't catch that. Do you want to play bridge or not?
Oh, fine. Let's play.
Mary, you wanted to Skype with Liz. Would you like to do that now?
Oh, sure, that sounds great. Hey, honey.
Hi, Mom. Hey, I just noticed, is it a little cool in the house?
Oh, it feels great. I'm doing my Tai Chi now.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay, Mom. Just checking in. You take care.
I'm fine, sweetie. Chat later.
There's a new TED Talk waiting for you if you'd like to watch it. Or perhaps you could go for a walk.
That's a good idea, LEQ.
Great, Mary. I'll be right here when you get back.
Great.
All right. And if we could go on to the next movie. You don't need to turn the lights. The next movie explains the technology behind that. Not as exciting, but this is the important part you got to know. So this is about how the computer recognizes handwriting. So it's explaining artificial intelligence with the example of how to recognize just the number 3. All right? Go ahead, start the video.
28 pixels like this, and outputs a single number between 0 and 10, telling you what it thinks the digit is, well, the task goes from comically trivial to dauntingly difficult. Unless you've been living under a rock, I think I hardly need to motivate the relevance and importance of machine learning and neural networks to the present and to the future. But what I want to do here is show you what a neural network actually is, assuming no background, and to help visualize what it's doing, not as a buzzword, but as a piece of math. My hope is just that you come away feeling like the structure itself is motivated, and to feel like you know what it means when you read or you hear about a neural network, quote-unquote, learning. This video is just going to be devoted to the structure component of that, and the following one is going to tackle learning. What we're going to do is put together a neural network that can learn to recognize handwritten digits. This is a somewhat classic example for introducing the topic, and I'm happy to stick with the status quo here, because at the end of the two videos, I want to point you to a couple good resources where you can learn more, and where you can download the code that does this and play with it on your own computer. There are many, many variants of neural networks, and in recent years there's been sort of a boom in research towards these variants. But in these two introductory videos, you and I are just going to look at the simplest, plain vanilla form with no added frills. This is kind of a necessary prerequisite for understanding any of the more powerful modern variants, and trust me, it still has plenty of complexity for us to wrap our minds around. But even in this simplest form, it can learn to recognize handwritten digits, which is a pretty cool thing for a computer to be able to do. And at the same time, you'll see how it does fall short of a couple hopes that we might have for it. As the name suggests, neural networks are inspired by the brain. But let's break that down. What are the neurons, and in what sense are they linked together? Right now, when I say neuron, all I want you to think about is a thing that holds a number, specifically a number between 0 and 1. It's really not more than that. For example, the network starts with a bunch of neurons corresponding to each of the 28 times 28 pixels of the input image, which is 784 neurons in total. Each one of these holds a number that represents the grayscale value of the corresponding pixel, ranging from 0 for black pixels up to 1 for white pixels. This number inside the neuron is called its activation. And the image you might have in mind here is that each neuron is lit up when its activation is a high number. So all of these 784 neurons make up the first layer of our network. Now jumping over to the last layer, this has 10 neurons, each representing one of the digits. The activation in these neurons, again, some number that's between 0 and 1, represents how much the system thinks that a given image corresponds with a given digit. There's also a couple layers in between called the hidden layers, which for the time being should just be a giant question mark for how on earth this process of recognizing digits is going to be handled. In this network, I chose 2 hidden layers, each one with 16 neurons, and admittedly, that's kind of an arbitrary choice. To be honest, I chose 2 layers based on how I want to motivate the structure in just a moment, and 16, well, that was just a nice number to fit on the screen. In practice, there is a lot of room for experiment with a specific structure here. The way the network operates, activations in one layer determine the activations of the next layer. And of course, the heart of the network, as an information processing mechanism, comes down to exactly how those activations from one layer bring about activations in the next layer. It's meant to be loosely analogous to how in biological networks of neurons, some groups of neurons firing cause certain others to fire. Now the network I'm showing here has already been trained to recognize digits. And
all right,
let me show you what I mean.
Stop the video now.
It means if you feed in an image, lighting up all...
All right, so that gets a little bit gray in the middle there telling us about these middle layers, but you get the idea in a sense that it's a guessing algorithm that can guess what you did with pretty decent accuracy as the number of pixels rises. And that's an example of weak artificial intelligence that's been around for a long time. You probably know it as optical character recognition, OCR, and a lot of technologies use that OCR. The version that we use for audio, for listening and interpreting what you say, actually is very similar to that. There's speech-to-text recognition, so it's transmitting what you say into the text, and it's using a similar process of matching what you said to a database of what to say next. And there are a lot of companies that are collecting data on conversations in order to do that. You might have heard of some of them. Amazon, Google, Apple. Siri is free, and Amazon Echo is free, and Google Home is free, because they're collecting data on what you say and how it responds, and improving their algorithm using this deep neural network approach. And the computers are like our brain. So our brain has 80 billion neurons and trillions and trillions of connections. And it's patterns of those connections, activation, that cause us to think and learn. And we're basically now creating computers that can gradually think and learn and create stronger AI going forward. So right now, the technology isn't there. It's really difficult to have a conversation unless we pre-program every single key word. But I believe in just 2 or 3 years, the technology will be there. And there are companies like CareNote. With CareNote, is a real human that will listen to you, and they're keeping notes on the conversations and trying to develop profiles that they can use to create later artificial intelligence that can create that concept. So right now it's human, and almost every major technology company is collecting massive amounts of data so they can create this artificial intelligence. So we're just about out of time, but I just want to say we can use virtual reality to change your mood and change your perspective by gradually giving you different experiences, from the most familiar to gradually more and more interesting. And it doesn't work the same for everybody, but I think we can use that very powerfully.
Well, I have to say, I'm really scared of the LEQ. I would not want to have a robot in my living room, watching me and remind me to take a walk and, do yoga or do meditation. That's kind of scary.
Well, you're not isolated, so you got friends. If you have friends, you don't need that LEQ. If you don't, though, if you're all by yourself, it's something, someone to talk to that might help prevent cognitive decline and mental health decline.
She reminds me of my mom, so. So.
We can create a personality, too, that matches you and what you want.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hagedorn. And thank you all for having us. We will be staying until the end of the conference if you have any questions. Thank you. Next slide. Our contact information.
Thank you. We have a small present.
Thank you, Professor Hagedorn and Mrs. Wong. We have presents for you. Let's give them another round of applause.
Well, it's us again.